Great. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks to all of you for participating. We've asked a bit of you lately, and you've really stepped up, and appreciate that. Wanted to give you just an update on some of the events of the last couple of weeks. First is that a week ago yesterday, we had our press conference. The Lieutenant Governor, Representative Snow, Mayor Wilson from Salt Lake County, the Speaker or the President of the Senate, Stuart Adams, Mayor Walker, and Teresa Moxley spoke. Got a lot of good press coverage out of it. In fact, I don't know exactly how many stories, but I think we saw somewhere around 12 to 14 or 15 stories. All of the newspapers, the TV stations, the major radio stations, and we felt like the coverage was good and substantive, and so it was a nice start for us. We also, as you know, last week issued the solicitation to select our planning team. That's a big step. One of the reasons we had the press conference was to announce this transition from visioning to specific planning at the site. And we announced Steve Kellenberg coming on as our director of planning. We talked about the RFQ that went out. We talked about the process that we'll go through. We started an online survey so members of the public can participate in giving us input and helping to prioritize the concepts that came out of earlier public processes. And in that first week, we've already had over 1,700 members of the public weigh in. So that was really nice feedback. I wanted to let you know that as we put out that solicitation, as promised, we wanted to incorporate the input from our working groups. And so that solicitation went out, included a number of what we call key vision elements. These are concepts that we think are really important, that you identified as being important. And we've asked the respondents to address each of those key vision elements. Tell us what their background is in those areas and what their big ideas are for addressing them. So I'll just kind of read through them, and you'll see your handiwork embedded in these key vision elements. The first one is creating an iconic, vibrant, mixed-use community, focus on quality of life, healthy living, strategic balance of jobs and housing, welcoming gathering place, recreation, culture, etc. The second one was focusing on transportation and having high-quality, future-focused, multimodal transportation, including active transportation serving the site, reducing emissions, limiting parking. The third, promote enduring statewide economic development through job creation, workforce development, and revenue generation. Create a community that will attract and nurture top talent, outstanding anchor companies, as well as smaller local businesses. And the one maybe most directly associated with this particular group is advance innovation by creating a place that promotes a culture of creativity and ingenuity, attracts outstanding talent and investment, promotes solution-oriented research, fosters the growth of promising early-stage companies, eliminates regulatory barriers, and facilitates interdisciplinary industry and academic partnerships to generate and commercialize new ideas. So again, a lot of the language that you came up with at that last meeting put into our solicitation. The fifth, focusing on sustainable development, ways to reduce air and water pollution, reduce energy use, and water use, taking advantage of often on-site renewables, including the geothermal resource that's there. And then the last one, focusing primarily on coordination with surrounding communities in the region, making sure that our efforts on transportation, infrastructure, and land use are coordinated so they work for the region. So all those ideas that, again, were fed by your input, we've asked the respondents to address each of those specifically. So we've got a pretty ambitious process that's been set up. Yesterday, we had our first meeting with potential applicants. It was a pre-submittal meeting that was mandatory for anybody who wants to participate. We had, I think, about 107 participants representing 42 or 43 different firms, including 10 that we targeted as being kind of real leaders in the field. This is open to everyone. We're going to ask them to respond with a statement of qualifications in the next couple of weeks. We'll then spend probably 24 hours a day for the week after that going through these applications, scoring them on a system that was set up, narrowing the field to a short list of no more than 6. We'll interview those firms to get to stage 2, which will involve 3 finalists. And those 3 finalists will we'll try to bring them on site, let them see the area, do an early charrette, give them a scope of work, give them further detail on the site. We'll then bring them back a week later for a second charrette where they will share their early ideas. We'll have a discussion, say we like this, don't like this, see if we can steer them in a positive direction consistent with the ideas that you're generating. And then finally have them come in and present to the selection committee. And we'll make a recommendation then to the point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board and hope that we can have a group that's engaged by the end of the year. It's going to be ambitious, but to keep things moving, that's the direction we're heading. And as we set up the scoring system, we've ensured that those key elements that you've identified are priorities. So higher point totals available to those that successfully address these key vision elements that you've helped us identify. So we're excited about that process. We talked about the working groups at our press conference. The newspaper reporters we talked to were interested in your involvement and saw real value in that. So I've just got to say thanks again for the time and effort. I think that's the overview, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. Okay.
Hey, Alan, would it be possible to share that document with us that went out to solicit the bids?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do it. It's we will share that with you. It is available on the state U3P website, Utah Public Procurement Place, and all of the details are incorporated there. But I'll get a copy from DFCM and pass it on.
I just included a link. Sorry, Kelvin. I just included a link in the chat to the document. It's also posted on the homepage of our website.
Great. Thanks, Muriel. So, Mr. Representative Handy, I guess I'd turn it back to you if there are no more questions.
I don't have anything. That's terrific. Let's go on to the next agenda item, Alan. The reports now, right?
Right. So we appreciate those of you that volunteered to be part of these subgroups, and you took it really seriously and spent a lot of time thinking through the issues. So if you'd be willing, would if you'd kind of share an overview of what you came up with, and then let the broader group engage in some conversation, whether there's some ideas or adjustments that they would suggest. So somebody been designated from that innovation district group that would share an overview of what you came up with?
I don't know that we delegated to anyone, but I'm happy to take that as I've compiled some of that data for everybody, if no one objects.
Thank you, Brenner.
Alan, I sent the PDF over. Do I need to include it here for everyone's benefit, or did that go out already, the meeting notes?
I haven't sent it out, so if you've got it, I want to pull that up. That'd be great.
Okay. Give me just a minute here. Or how about I send it out right as I wrap up? Is that okay in the interest of time?
Yeah, that's fine. And I'll see if I can pull it up here on my screen, and you can talk through that.
Okay, great. So first off, I want to thank the team. We had Chris Klomp, Diogo, Kelvin, Jeffrey, Derek, David, and myself working on a couple of different meetings, calls, and even tried to do a face-to-face, as well as some surveys that went out to our respective networks. So basically what we first did is try to wordsmith a little more of that vision statement that we came up with in a previous meeting, more on the chat bar than anything else. So what we've come up with, if we can get that put up, is to develop a diverse, high-density district to inspire a culture of innovation by incorporating cutting-edge technology with a living and working space where the world can visit the future. Can you hear me okay, Alan?
I can hear you. Can you see that on your screen now?
Yep.
Now, can we get everybody to mute? I'm getting a bunch of feedback.
Thanks. That's why I was asking. I started to hear some as well. So anyhow, to finish off that statement then, with the living and working space where the world can visit the future, an exploratory sandbox to attract human and capital resources with increased collaboration, rapid idea generation, and reduced regulation. I apologize, I'm just reading for those of you who maybe aren't able to see the screen share, just dialed in. Hopefully that will help. But then quickly we boiled it down to the key elements that are active ingredients or critical ingredients in a center like that, or a district like that. So from an elements, we broke that up into some of the things that we thought would create that gravitational pull. How do we get founders? How do we get funders, creators? How do we attract some of the people with the minds that are stuck in the cutting edge and kind of pushing the realm of technology, and maybe overall just get interesting humans involved in this community in order to propagate that innovation and that creative spirit or ethos that comes with a district like that. So we first explored a bunch of ideas around this vision-focused programming. So how do we create programming that is focused on delivering against that vision statement? We boiled it down to three primary things, and there's lots of ancillary information that could come with each, but we were trying not to be very prescriptive, but in general, just kind of strategic in the recommendations. So the first would be, and these are in priority order. So first and foremost, we think it's important to get those anchor companies, but also, as was stated in your document at the top of the call, Alan, include small companies in this, what we call Crossroads of the World lecture and panel series. So by bringing in the brightest from whether that's a globalization perspective or that's from one of the different sectors, which we'll recommend in a moment, bringing people in to have engaging conversations about what is changing around the world from a innovation landscape. So we believe that having those small vignettes of people coming in and talking will generate lots of collaboration and collisions so that we can have more and more meaningful conversations around innovation. The second element then from programming is workshops, actual innovative workshops or experiential learning, whether that's pitch contests or funding firesides or hackathons, lots of different things, executables that could help us deliver on those workshops that are really hands-on, getting people involved and bringing people, drawing people from not only around Utah, but around the world in to be able to participate in some of those workshops we felt was very important. And then third, having some element of professional services and associations involvement, whether that's presenting the professional services that are available, especially as we're talking about limiting some of the regulatory body or maybe having some sandbox areas where we can bend some rules, so to speak, so that we can apply some of our innovation. That would be very commensurate of us to have then the ability to have those regulators speaking and talking about why these things have been maybe bent or adjusted so that we might be able to explore safely in that space. But that would include things like legal and finance and creative, and having a portfolio of professional services around. But again, this is programming. So to be able to invite people to come in and talk about some of these services that are available here locally to help those either the anchor businesses or the fast growth businesses, whatever's needed there in the innovation piece. So that's the three primary deliverables that we recommend from programming to achieve the vision. Then the second category is what actual physical or facility type investments or opportunities should we consider or would we recommend to help us create kind of what we toyed around with. A slogan for this one is the smallest big city in America. So kind of mirroring what we've talked about from a programming perspective, not to just have anchor businesses that come in and lecture, but actually have anchor corporate offices as well as R&D facilities, whether that's wet labs or virtual or clinical labs. The infrastructure for that comes with some of those anchor tenants could really help, but also having presentation space. So if they're going to bring their clients or they're going to bring their employees from all over the world to the venue, we would really appreciate that they would have venues that then could be used by the larger community to host some of these lectures, host some of these workshops, or even host some of the professional services and the programming that we just discussed. The second piece then, and again in priority order, is the policy sandbox. We talked a lot about this back and forth. We actually put a survey out to our respective networks, and this policy sandbox is something that's very interesting, maybe sometimes hard to really handle and control exactly what it is. But we've seen that a lot of businesses have looked to Utah for things like regulatory relief around industrial banking or very pro-business type policymakers, where Governor Herbert's tried to strip out 300 laws that might be maybe creating friction around business. So very pro-business type legislation. So if we have some sandbox latitude, that can help make people incentivized to choose Utah, or anchors to choose coming to our innovation district instead of some other state because of that pro-policy environment. So a couple of examples there. The third one then, not just from our own interest, but also from some of our respondents, is restaurant and retail is very important. If we're going to create a place where people can collide, where people can co-work, where people can meet, almost build it and they will come. We do need to have those meeting places where they can come and meet, they can come and eat. And this is not just fast casual, but it's also fine dining. We need to have a mix of places so people don't feel like they have to travel off-site to go get to a very high-end restaurant, for example. But maybe even some of those restaurants might have meeting rooms or even test kitchen concepts, as well as maybe some retail shops that will showcase that technology that's being innovated or tested within the district, so that when we invite the world, there's almost a shopping experience built around some of that innovation. Next, then we have housing. One of the things that we've toyed around with, I think Diogo was the biggest proponent of this, is let's get 500-story skyscrapers put in the point, right? This could really become the highest density, smallest city in big America, or highest density, smallest big city in America, if we have this concentration of lots of people, lots of interesting people from all over the world. So this is one of our suggestions that we'd like to see a design concept around, some feedback around as far as residential, lots of residential, as well as hotel and extended stay. So maybe not a master planned community with 2-acre lots, but a lot of people in one area that would be interested in having access to the greater outdoors that we have here in Utah, having access to all the other benefits of living in Utah, but not having to leave the urban environment that many of them are so used to. Anyway, just something that we considered. And then lastly, leisure. We talked quite a bit about leisure. And in fact, our respondents were very interested in the aspect of leisure, jogging, cycling, things like that. But what we kind of settled on was access to leisure. So we have the great fortune of this 700 acres being positioned right next to or almost on top of the Jordan River pathway. And so there's 60, 70 miles of pathway and connecting parks and all kinds of recreational activities that are available, but quickly accessible. We even joked about access. Maybe we could put a tramway to Snowbird from the point, which would be really cool. Anyway, so those are some of the things we talked about in association with the physical and the facilities. Next are target sectors, and we have these broken out into 5. And one of the things we struggled with our ideation, compounding, and then refactoring is to try and put them into categories. And so first and foremost, we identified a target category rather than just being technology like fintech and sports tech, but that we would have software. So software is a big component of the innovation that is done currently in and around Utah, but has also become something that we've become very good at, very skilled at. So we thought software would be number one, life sciences would be number two, all encompassing like sports tech or sports products could be funneled into that. And then lastly would clean energy. Alan, you mentioned at the top of the call, there's the geothermal, there's some cool stuff that we can do there to not only innovate, but showcase some of those cutting edge clean energy solutions as a target sector. And then lastly, alliances. We went through the exercise of coming up with a bunch of examples, but then decided not to do that, not be too prescriptive, but just say, obviously, first and foremost, we want to target some Fortune 500s as anchor tenants, but we also want to make sure that we have some high growth local companies that are rocket ships that are exploding in growth. How do we target them and get them involved? And then we had some results that come from successfully achieving some powerful anchor tenants that would be investors will come, co-working spaces will come, universities will come. We actually talked quite a bit about university and academia, but then it was great to realize that we had a subgroup that was also just tackling academia as a whole. So we kind of deferred to them. So those were our primary findings and recommendations. We did talk a little bit about next steps that we'd like to have some validation on the sectors with various stakeholders, whether that's GoEd or EDC Utah, and then reviewing this with the rest of this working group, as well as maybe create a short list of potential candidates. One of the recommendations from our subgroup was to start with anchors that might have already invested in Utah, whether that's Adobe putting up a big campus, Oracle, Microsoft, SAP, life sciences companies, Myriad Edwards, Becton Dickinson, even Alphabet. So could we start with talking to some of those anchors that have already chosen Utah for various reasons, and then just augment that initial value proposition by what we're building here in this innovation district? So that's what we have. Alan, how do you want to handle objections, concerns, questions? You want me to just open it up, or how would you like to proceed?
First of all, thank you. I mean, this is really good substance, reflects a lot of good thought, and I know that you met several times trying to accommodate very busy people to put this together. Maybe we'll just see if there's anyone else on this subgroup that participated that would like to emphasize anything that Brenner went through.
This is Jeff Nelson. I'd just say I think Brenner did a great job, covered it really well, and we had a good group that provided a lot of input.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, you did. Anyone else?
Kelvin or David or Diogo?
Nothing really to add. I think you summarized it great. I think we had there was a lot more than this that got funneled right down into what we're seeing here. And especially as we tried to avoid being too prescriptive. And there's a lot contemplated in these broad topics. So there will be opportunity for much more discussion down the road, but I thought Brenner did a fabulous job of taking, like herding cats, getting it all down into one document like this. So
thanks. And that's terrific. And yes, understand that these are complex issues with a lot of detail and deserving of further conversation. So we don't want to lose any of the good thought that you put into it. This gives us, I think, a little bit of focus and priority, and then we can refine as we get with the planning team. But, outstanding. Let's turn it to the rest of the working group, those of you who were not part of this subgroup, and see if you've got any initial reactions, things that you especially like, potential concerns you have, things that you might add.
I just say that's big thinking, and that's what we need. We just need to, there's no, constraints here. Think as big as we can. I love the target sectors. It's, articulates what I've been thinking about too. Software, life sciences, clean energy. It's just terrific.
And while some of you are thinking on that point, we're going to have our economic development, recruitment, and investment team on Thursday really focus on some of those target sectors and have EDCU talk about what they've been looking at, have others weigh in and see if we can collectively, not just those working groups, but all of us together, identify a handful of target sectors that we can focus on. So you're right on target and timely in suggesting those areas. Other thoughts from members of the working group? Okay, sounds like we've got some pretty good consensus around what you outlined, and that's really helpful. So
Thank you.
thanks very much, Brenner, for organizing that group. Thanks to all of you for participating. And we'll take this and, as I'll describe in a little more detail later, use it to help kind of create the report that we're going to hand over to our planning finalists for developing the master plan. So outstanding. Okay, well, I think co-chairs, if you're okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is the group that was looking at industry and academic partnerships, what those might look like. Was there somebody from that group that is ready to present your findings?
I can do that if the group is okay with that.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. And we pulled together some thoughts, which I sent to Alan in an email. It's really just a bullet point list and needs some cleaning work. So Brenner set a great example of having a really clean document. Ours still looks a little ideation, but I think it can be summed up really quickly and hopefully will spark some discussion with this working group. And that is, we ran into, in our discussions, the chicken and egg dilemma of academia. We know that if we build it, they will come doesn't work. But at the same time, industry and university partnerships kind of have this balance of, do you start the research or do you base the research on an industry problem? And research that's there's pure research, which is great, and then there's applied research, which is also important. And so looking at this district, we could have gone in several different ways. And what we ended up with is an educational innovation park set aside. So what we would propose is that in this phase of the planning, that a certain amount of acreage to be decided in the master planning process and with the consultants and the shaping, that a piece of land gets put aside for educational innovation park. That the revenue from that land, the sale, lease, development, whatever, goes into this innovation partnership among the institutions of the state. So it becomes a funding source, a resource for this partnership. In the institutions that were represented, we understand that we are a small piece of a bigger puzzle across the state, and that we're part of a statewide system and multiple statewide systems, actually, because there's K-12 and all of these other educational and we were universities, but you have the technical colleges as well who play a bigger role in kind of clean manufacturing and other opportunities for workforce development that might come out of an education innovation park. So simply set aside some land, dedicate it to the advancement of innovation in partnership with education in the state, and then create an education-driven innovation board that helps govern what happens with the revenue, who gets to be partners, who gets to develop, who gets to lease, who gets to be a part of that, and give that, you can see this, the Education Innovation Board gets governance and jurisdiction over that acreage and gets to help decide who gets to be involved and what projects we're going to pursue, what kind of research gets moved over there with industry partnerships. So that's really the main thing, that you create space and that you give a governance to that space that is owned by education. There are statewide institutions that would have to be involved in this who are run by their own boards and would have to, like, it's just an idea at this phase. But if you're going to have a set aside, you need somebody to govern it, and having simply one institution would be a more narrow look at what is possible. What we'd like is to have an opportunity to vet programming. So that's the governance piece. Companies that want to move into this space would have to come forward with a proposal to be a part of this space or buy this land or lease this land or develop in this area that has a partnership with education. So what we'd like to see in the rest of the innovation district is that when somebody comes looking for us, and we talked about the difference between setting parameters and going out so that companies bring us proposals about how to be involved in this awesome project versus going out and asking companies involved. And what we would like to see is that we create the parameters and then we get to pick our partners based on who brings proposals that make sense for what we want, which is ideal, right? It's ideal for us to have multiple different parties who are like, we'd love to partner with universities, and this is a really innovative idea, and we're willing to put our dollars down. And in the rest of the district, we'd like to see a preference given to people who have an education partnership as part of their proposal for development. But within the innovation park, the education piece of it, they would be required if they were going to be there. They would be required to have a partnership and bring that partnership to this innovation board. The relationship management, the board would also help manage and create a concierge experience for all the innovation district companies with our institutions. Access to the institutions, understanding what the resources are in our current institutions. There's $1 billion a year in research going on, and very few companies understand or have access to that. And what we talked about was creating, one second. Creating a space where companies can come and we can open doors and at least have parameters set for how you get access to certain things, because we have a nanofabrication lab, we have a nuclear reactor, but companies just can't walk into the state and get access to those things, and they shouldn't. And we have research that's going on there. So some things will be accessible, some things will not, but this innovation board would know how to help people gain access to the resources that our institutions have. And that includes vetting opportunities that industry brings to us. And then also some of those programming, individual corporate engagement was going to continue, but we can help collaborate with GoEd and EDCU. And we envisioned a place where if a company was interested in Utah, they would come in, partner with our economic development, and have a place where all the institutions are represented and could answer questions if they had questions about research and R&D and capabilities and workforce that the institutions, technical colleges, and universities could help support them with, which is another kind of recruiting concierge service of the board. And then programming is the same things that we talked about, those iterative, piloted programs, partnerships with industry, hackathons, R&D-athons, where we're wrestling with some of those industry problems within this education park. Resourcing starts slow, and all the institutions involved would need to, we looked at resourcing, they would need to commit personnel, time, and money to this, but not all at once and not up front. So it's a matter of allowing for priorities to be moved up in institutions, but that's a commitment that they'll put this opportunity early on and have it be a high priority, because we're all doing our own kinds of research, and it would be behoove us to have the things coming out of the innovation district and moving into the innovation district be a priority for the institutions. Industries are a little early to pick. Like we said, we're hoping people will bring proposals that companies, some of these great Fortune 500 companies that we're courting, would come forward and say, okay, for this piece of it, we want to do this kind of partnership with education, and maybe it makes sense to put them in the innovation park. Certainly most of the Fortune 500 companies that I've dealt with have a university partnership somewhere in the country, in the world, and multiple of them, because it's great for their business, and it's great for workforce, and it's great for R&D. And then phase 2 would be more about that physical space, building it out, developing it, a high reliance on that public-private partnership. And we can see a future accelerator, possibly a facility for research, hospital or clinic, kind of the clinical testing site that was also mentioned by Brenner's group. We can see some future there, and also the SBIR office or that federal grant opportunity that might be housed in the space where they could partner with small businesses. And I think this is also a place where R&D and companies launching out of Research Park and other research areas, incubators in the institutions and universities could have a soft landing. So there's space built in for this board to decide if there's a place for incubating kind of medium businesses before they go to market, but after they've reached capacity at the university, a soft landing place for those research driven industry partners and small businesses. I hope that's a complication of a very simple plan. Set aside some funding and a board to govern it.
Those are great ideas. Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate you getting that group together and summarizing a lot of information into kind of a simple format. Any comments from other members of that subgroup that participated and would like to emphasize any element of that list?
I think consistent with what has been discussed in this group before, this group was careful not to prescribe programming from universities or classroom type experiences on site. I think there was a discussion about the fact that anything from a university that would come here in that regard would need to be self-contained and stand alone in some respects. But the one thing that is clear, there is an undeniable link between our universities and innovation. And there has to be a way to coordinate the resources that exist in the state. And this presents an opportunity to do that and to link up resources from both aspects. It's just hard to prescribe how that might be done at this point, but clearly, there has to be a way of doing that. And this framework, I think, helps us get there.
Kelvin, that was something we talked about in our group quite a bit. And I think one of the points I just want to emphasize is, I completely agree with you. There's a very important link there. But I do think if we start with industry first, that academic institutions can really complement that, where it seems hard to build the other direction.
I think it's a great point, Jeff, and something that we talked a little about, and I think Donna touched on. I think that especially if you look at all the universities as a whole, there are so many strengths that you could focus on, but which is the right one. And I think trying to sort of put a flag in the ground in that respect is challenging. And so rather than try and do that and recognizing that universities as a collective bring a very broad base that should be attractive, we can let the market decide, in effect, where we gravitate to. And as Donna articulated, trying to make it a concierge experience, because I think those of us in the academic setting are sensitive to the experience that industry sometimes has. It can be challenging to navigate, trying to get one thing accomplished with an academic institution of any sizable note can oftentimes take you through a dozen different offices. And so having a single point of contact, not only for one university, but in effect for all of them across the state, provides an interesting and I think unique message to industry in terms of our desire to collaborate and how we're willing to organize in order to affect that at a rate of speed that you may not find anywhere else.
Yeah, I think it's well said. And I think there will be a lot of opportunities for educational collaboration and partnership. I guess the way I'd summarize this is I think education and academia is very necessary, just not sufficient on its own. So that's why I think the industry first connection will really facilitate the academic collaboration and partnerships, to your point. And I agree with you.
Jeff, I really like what you just said, you and Keith both. I think industry coming in, and then I love what Keith, what you mentioned about all institutions be represented there, right?
Yeah.
So that then we find the best fit and who has the expertise to help in that particular area. Because if not, man, it's going to be a very interesting process that we go through to determine which institutions are there and which institutions do get represented. This way, if there's the board that Donna talked about, and we can really connect them to who's best suited to help that particular industry, all the better. In fact, that's exactly what we want. So thank you for all your work on that.
I think one thing to emphasize as you've been talking to is there's a unique experience here that could be offered if an industry came forward and had a problem and wanted to work on a project and it went to the innovation board for vetting. You might find experts in different areas of that problem from each of the institutions. You might have professors or students who come, and graduate students or researchers might be working side by side with, a cybersecurity team from EVU and an aerospace team from here and a manufacturing team from somewhere else, or a mechanical engineering team from the U. And that collaboration, that builds the future of our workforce and the opportunity to work in such an exciting collaborative way that we can't even measure the outcome of that. But we know, and we've seen in other industries where this happens, that great things come out. And that really is innovation, when you can pull these silos apart and start putting the pieces together in exciting ways.
Donna, I had a question. This is a really, really creative, intriguing idea. When you first started out, I thought you were talking maybe about an innovative education think tank. But I think what you're more talking about is a governance structure. And your last question there, your last answer to that question, really kind of helped solidify that in my mind. But it's more of a dedicated governance structure for a portion of the site. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so the key financial resource is the portion of the site, right? That there's land set aside for this, which we've seen in a lot of the other parks, university parks and other industry collaborations, and in the research triangle and other places that we discussed, is that piece of land is kind of an important asset. And then the governing structure is what opens up all the possibilities. So that innovation, the Education Innovation Board, is that governing structure. And that's really the heart of this whole proposal, is that we have the asset and then we give it a really good governing structure that can face whatever opportunities come forward. And the difference between preference and requirement, Brenner, as you asked, throughout the Innovation District, we'd love to see, if companies are coming to buy and develop, we'd love to see companies who have an interest in education partnerships, that if you have two companies vying for the same spot, one with an education partnership would get preference, right? Or they're wanting to give back and contribute to the community and to development. But within the education part where that land is set aside, companies who want to build in that space would be required to have an education partnership to build in that, whatever that acreage looks like, that little part of it. Maybe not so little, but
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that one of the other benefits to this is when a company comes and presents an opportunity, it may well be that one or more universities has a physical capability that doesn't require reinventing the wheel with a new build out in this space. And so why do it? And so, as Donna said, sort of out of the gate, that field of dreams concept is definitely not what we want to lead out with here. That you can come, you can sort of have a one-stop shop and understand what all the university-based assets are across the state. And if it doesn't exist because it's so cutting edge or it's so interdisciplinary, fabulous. Let's talk about maybe this is the place to build it. But if it does exist for some of the other assets, as we've talked about in this and past meetings, the point is sort of well located geographically, and the state is not so large that no matter what campus you're talking about, from USU to Dixie, did I get my north-south distance as far apart as I could? Accessing those facilities is probably not a reach. So I don't think that should be something that gets lost in the dialogue here.
Good points. What other thoughts we have? I just have a question. Did you give any thought to the details of who would be on that education innovation group? It's not an easy task to work through some of the issues that you've identified.
Well, we did give a lot of thought to that. And we kind of have some ideas, but the truth of the matter is, we're part of multiple systems, and that needs to be decided by the stakeholders. That's going to be in further discussion with David and his board, and with our institutions, and with the technical colleges. Really, it's about, probably getting more people in the room than we had access to in the month that we've done this, to look at where do those boards sit on this opportunity. But I think definitely a representative from our research institutions, absolutely. Maybe more than one, some representation from technical colleges and those who have assets that might be also quickly used, and then a governing kind of statewide entity. In fact, all the governing statewide entities. What we don't really want is for it to be government driven. We would like it to be education driven. So we'd like it to sit somewhere where those who understand education and industry partnerships, more than maybe shuffling it in under a different organization. We'd like it to kind of stand as its own representative board for education in the state, specifically for this district and the unique opportunities that come to this district.
One of the things that I would hope, Alan, is we put together, if it goes that direction, put together that governing board of the State Board of Education has the control of that. The only way to control 8 different institutions across the state is to get to their bosses, which is the State Board of Education, with 8 different university presidents and college presidents, actually 16 now, presidents across the state, is to have that connectivity back to the State Board of Education, who is appointed by the governor. So my hope would be that would somehow be connected back to, the ultimate would be back to the State Board of Education, that would identify and assign those individuals to sit on that governing board from a mix of industry and education.
Yeah, thanks. And to that last point, I think there are some on this broader working group that would suggest it's best to have the private sector, industry, driving what goes in some of these areas. So I'm curious why, and
part of the unique balance in an education partnership is that you need the cooperation and you need the neutrality. And so it gets to be a little bit of a complicated question, but that's why we kind of housed it in education. Also, there's some deep work to be done on just mapping the resources across the state in the institutions. And industry can say, yes, we'll just send them to the nanofab lab, or we'll just send them to the, to get access to this clinical trial. And the university is going to be like, I can't do what you want me to do because I'm not in a company. I can't just open my doors and let you come in. I have to figure out access processes. And that's a little bit of heavy work on the side of this board it's in there, but it doesn't show up quite as big as it does if you live in higher ed. The mapping of resources is a big part of this.
can certainly see that, and that's helpful. I appreciate that background.
Keith may have other thoughts.
I think one other thing worth noting is also that that concierge service that we talked about, having that level of representation on the board, I think is also part of the quote sell to an industry partner, is that they could see up front they will have the ability to sort of get that navigation. If you're going to ask industry to sort of vet these opportunities, but without a clear understanding, as Donna was saying, about what the resources are or how accessible those resources are, I don't know that you get an optimal outcome. I think the other thing to also keep in mind is that we see this a lot where industry has an idea, they want to bring it to us, and we're either so far behind the thinking on that idea or so far ahead of the thinking on that idea that neither of those scenarios may necessitate moving that project to the top of the list, and making sure that there's strong alignment sort of out of the gate, I think, is important for cultivating lasting relationships that yield value over time.
Good points. Other thoughts, additions, concerns? Great. Well, that's terrific work with the team, and really appreciate the thought that's gone into it. Really appreciate the time that's gone into it, and I think these are things that are concrete ideas that we can develop further and incorporate in the report. So, thank you. Maybe I can just jump quickly into the next steps discussion and then see if you've got anything further before we wrap up. So as we look down the road, we've got, I think, a number of things going on. One is we really want to get this master planning process underway in an informed way. So we want those that are working on it to not just pull off their last project from the shelf and say, let's just tweak it a little bit for Utah. But instead, we want to give pretty clear guidance on what it is we're trying to accomplish. And that's where you've played a really significant role. We anticipate that we'll be handing over kind of a rough general report to the planning team at the end of this process. In fact, if we can, we'll turn it over to the 3 finalists and let them wrestle with it a little bit. The report would include some of the ideas that are created by these working groups, along with the public input we've had, the results of the public survey that we do, and say, here are some things that we locally value. These are things that we would like to accomplish at this site, and would like you to be addressing these things as you make your presentations at the end of the day. How would you go about incorporating these ideas into a master plan? Now, some of the things that you've described today probably don't fit into a physical master plan. It's going to be a busy time because, as I said, reviewing all the applications that come in is going to keep us busy, but we'll make the time to do this. Anything else that anybody wants to share at this point? Ideas on the process going forward, how we can optimize it, concerns that you have, or other ideas that we ought to be pursuing at this point?
Hey, Alan, this is Chris. Just a question mostly, which is how do we best support you in that next chapter, a couple of chapters? I realize you have relatively limited resource at this point, and that is a Herculean but really important task.
Well, I appreciate the question, Chris. And I think what we'll do, we've got one more meeting set up this calendar year, next month. And I think if we can find a little bit of time, we'll try to outline that report and then get you to weigh in on it a little bit. Have we captured the ideas that you've presented? Are there other things that ought to be included? And I think if we can get to that point, that'll give us a good product going forward. Then, as we said, once the master planning effort starts, at key milestones along the way, we'll want to take the ideas being generated by the planning team and run them by our working groups and get your input on that. I would say we've got a couple of paths here. We've got the master planning path, but there's also this idea of kind of the non-physical part of creating the innovation district. If we do something along the lines of this education innovation group, if we talk about programming, those kinds of things need to be done in parallel. And I think we may be reaching out to some of you to help us think a little bit more through the next steps in that process as well. So I don't want to suggest that everything's on the master plan right now. That's kind of our focus because it's got to get done. But we know that there are other pieces that need to advance. And so we'll work with you to try to think through how we advance those pieces at the same time.
All right. That's helpful. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Well, to our co-chairs, that's all I've got. And I think we've run through our agenda.
Amazing session. Great thinking, don't you think, Commissioner? Just really great stuff. Look, what we need to do, I think you're right, Alan. We need to take these two documents, do some thinking about it, boil it down, and I guess that's in your court, boil it down and get some help with that as you need help. And then come back to this group, and as we've had a month to think about it with other things, and then kind of react to it. I had a question for Muriel, and that is, on the public survey that's on the website, are people responding? What's the response been so far?
Overwhelming, Representative. In the first week alone, we've had over 1,700 responses. So we feel like, that earned media coverage we got right out of the gate really helped to spread the word. And then we'll be working with the communications departments, with the area communities, state agencies, our partners to help further disseminate the information and spread the word. We'd also ask our working group members too, please feel free to pass along that link. It's located on the homepage of our website. We'd like as many people as possible to take that survey. It's available through Friday, October 16th. So we're keeping it open for a fairly extended period of time, and it takes less than 5 minutes to take.
Yeah, I predict there'll be some things that we can pull out of there, I'm sure.
Well, if there's nothing else, let me just, Commissioner, anything you want to add to that?
No, I very much appreciate everybody's hard work and effort. I know you guys are all very, very busy, and so thanks for all your help in weighing this in. I think we've just got a golden opportunity that we're taking advantage of, and appreciate everybody's help in doing that.
We're fortunate in Utah to have a lot of people who are extremely talented, but beyond that, care about this place and are willing to share some time and effort to make it better. And that's what we're all about. So I can't thank you enough for this wonderful input. And we'll work on next steps and be in touch with you. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.